All right, let's dive into today's explainer. We're breaking down a sermon that really gets to the heart of a huge theological concept, unity. But this isn't just about unity as a nice idea. No, this message frames it as a divine command, an absolute imperative. So let's get into it.
So this right here, this quote from the Gospel of John, this is the bedrock for the entire sermon. It's a prayer, and it sets the tone for everything else. The key takeaway is that this isn't just a friendly suggestion. It's presented as the ultimate goal, a kind of perfect, seamless oneness that can't be broken.
Okay, so let's dig into the foundational principle, which the sermon calls God's heart. The main point here is actually pretty simple but incredibly powerful. God's very nature is to gather, to unite. It's not just something God does, it's who God is.
Now, when we say divine unity, what are we actually talking about here? According to this teaching, it's a bond so incredibly strong that it's literally impossible to break. The sermon points way back to Adam and Eve as the original blueprint for this, the idea of leaving everything behind to become one. This is the theological launchpad for the whole argument.
So once that foundation of unity is set, the sermon immediately pivots to a conflict. It paints this picture of a huge spiritual battlefield. And on this battlefield, there are really only two opposing forces, one that gathers and one that, well, scatters. And here's how that cosmic battle breaks down. It's presented as very black and white. On one side, you have gathering, which is described as God's work, uniting, bringing people together, building things up. And on the other side, you have scattering, the work of an adversary, which is all about dividing, creating conflict, and breaking things apart. The sermon really anchors this idea in Scripture, but the line, "Whoever does not gather with me scatters." It's framed as a choice with absolutely no middle ground. To make this whole concept of gathering less abstract, the source uses some really vivid biblical images. You've got that protective, almost tender image of a hen gathering her chicks. Then there's the relentless love of a shepherd who will stop at nothing to find that single lost sheep, and the finality of a farmer bringing the good wheat into the barn. It paints this picture of a divine force that is constantly, actively working to bring everything together.
Okay, so if gathering is the ultimate goal, how do you actually do it? What does it look like in practice? Well, this next part of the sermon lays out what it calls the pillars of unity, the specific key actions needed to make it happen.
And here are the 4 pillars as they're presented. First up is agreeing in faith, which is described as just fully accepting Scripture and the words of prophets. Step 2, one mind in prayer. And this is interesting. It's not just praying together, but praying for the exact same thing with a shared purpose. Third is devotion to teaching, following the doctrines set by spiritual leaders. And finally, number 4, sharing in suffering, which means uniting by going through hardships together.
Now, that third pillar we just mentioned, devotion to teaching, it's apparently so important that the sermon gives it a whole section. This part focuses squarely on spiritual authority, that relationship between a leader and their flock, and frames it as absolutely essential for unity.
And wow, this is a direct quote from the sermon, and it could not be more clear. The message is that unity isn't some kind of negotiation. It's presented as a one-way street. The congregation has to align with the leader. This introduces a very specific idea that the sermon calls
This concept of directional unity. It leans heavily on that classic metaphor of the shepherd and the flock. The shepherd sets the direction, and the flock follows along. According to this teaching, you can only get real unity when the entire group moves as one, in the direction that's been set by its spiritual authority.
So, you've got these pillars, you have directional unity, but what's the end game? Where was all of this supposed to lead? Well, the final section of the sermon lays out the ultimate vision, to become one single body with one single purpose.
The end goal here is nothing less than transformation. It's about taking a whole bunch of different, separate people and forging them into one cohesive spiritual entity. But the message also stresses that this isn't about erasing what makes you an individual. It's about integrating that individuality into a much bigger whole.
And the main way this is explained is through the body metaphor. You know this one. A body has hands, feet, eyes, all these different parts, and each one has a totally unique and valuable role to play. Some parts are more visible, some are less, but every single part is absolutely essential for the body to work right. It's a way of showing how individual differences aren't just tolerated, they're actually necessary for the whole thing to come together. So at the end of the day, this whole process of unification is meant to have a massive social and spiritual impact.
It's about taking people who were once outsiders, total strangers to each other and to the faith, and turning them into family. They're not just individuals in a group anymore, they're fully integrated members of a single divine household.
And all of this leaves us with a pretty big question to think about, doesn't it? Based on these ideas of directional authority and the body metaphor, we're left with this critical thought. How does any community, spiritual or otherwise, manage that powerful call for collective unity while also protecting the unique value of each individual member? It's a central tension, and definitely something worth chewing on. Thanks for joining us.